So, good afternoon, everybody. We are exactly in the middle of the conference, so there is a special moment.
It's okay if you do. I've been to a lot of these conferences. You get tired. There's a lot of people, a lot of, rooms get warm like right in the middle, right? Like late afternoon, and you're like, oh man, it can get tough. So it's okay if you fall asleep or whatever. Gonna try to keep you laughing. I got some cartoons here. But if I get boring, I won't be offended. No judgment here. Maybe a little, but not too much. All right, so anyway, my talk is titled Bitcoin, the Ultimate Social Justice. And I purposefully titled it this way to be a little bit provocative because you guys are probably well aware of what a social justice warrior is. Now, insofar as there is injustice in society, social justice is needed. But this term has sort of been claimed by a lot of the people on the radical side of the political spectrum to justify almost anything. And I want to reclaim that word. And that's why I am giving this talk. And I believe Bitcoin to be the thing that will equalize things for everyone, the ultimate thing that will bring justice to the world. All right, so what do I mean by that? Well, let's talk first of all about oppression, because there is a lot of oppression in the world, right? We're all oppressed to some degree by the governments that are in charge of us. We're oppressed to some degree by people that have power over us and so on. But there are a lot of different societal problems. So let's take a look at some of them. So we have, for example, the fact that some people are poor, and they're sort of put into a situation where they're perpetually poor, and they can't really get out of it, largely due to the oppression of others. You also have the fact that, some people have more opportunities than others, which is to say that some people figure out ways to cheat the system a little bit, and other people don't know how to do it. So you end up with these weird nepotism situations that happen so frequently in sort of a fiat-based society that we live in. And the big thing is that people have power over other people. And that's, at its heart, what injustice is all about, is when you have power over somebody else, you can abuse that power. And that's often very abusive. And people suffer in many ways. And almost all injustice throughout history is in some form because people have power over other people. All right, so the traditional way in which people think about social justice is to look at the symptoms, right? And the fact of the matter is that's kind of looking at the tip of the iceberg. You're looking at the fact that people are poor, or they don't have shelter, or they don't have enough to eat, or they don't have a job, or something like that. And the typical way in which the social justice warrior thinks about it is, how do I fix that symptom that's coming through? And I would submit to you that what we really need to do is look underneath. What is the actual cause? What's causing this? The other thing is that people that are in the charity, NGO, like social good sphere tend to think of social good very narrowly. Typically, it's something like this. They think that you either feed them, right, which is pretty good, right? Like you're feeding them so they're not hungry anymore. Or you teach them how to fish, right? You give them some education. Or you give them some information, right? You post it on a website. They think that will solve everything. And I'm going to tell you right now that is not the problem. A lot of people think that is the problem. That if only they had the information, if only they got taught something, if only they had certain resources, then they would be okay. No, they're not going to be okay, because that is not the major problem. The major problem is oppression. We are being oppressed by the people that have power over us, okay? Instead of teaching the man how to fish, how about not requiring a fishing license? How about how about letting him own like a riverbed so he can figure out if fish is what he needs to grow? Okay? How about not taxing him for all the fish he's catching or fining him for catching it in the wrong place? See, these are all things that the government does to oppress us. And it's horrible because this is what stifles entrepreneurship, innovation, and all this other stuff. Now, when governments oppress, what happens? Well, typically they take it to the brink, right? They keep oppressing, keep oppressing, keep oppressing, and then you get revolution. You get revolution, right? And it's oftentimes very, very violent. The most recent one that I think everyone can remember is Arab Spring. The governments there oppressed their people so much, told them how to behave, what to do, what they couldn't do, that it got to the point where they were all fed up. And you had uprisings everywhere. You had a lot of violence. And that was actually pretty minor compared to the real violence that happens in a lot of other revolutions. What's exciting, though, is that Bitcoin gives us an opportunity to have a revolution that is peaceful. And that's why there's flowers for this guy. Bitcoin gives us that opportunity. But first, let's take a look at the problem that we have. See, the real oppression is fiat money. The real oppression that we have is fiat money. And fiat money in particular is very easy money. It's easy to produce. It just takes a central banker, typing something into a computer database, and bam, they've made a bunch of money. And that's how fiat money is produced. And that has some profound implications for society. So, anyone know what this is? Anyone? Yeah. It is money. It is money. It is money. So these are what you call trade beads. And this was utilized in sub-Saharan Africa well, first of all, these are made out of glass beads and they're painted. So glass in sub-Saharan Africa is pretty rare. And that scarcity makes it pretty good for money. It's hard money. Now, what happened later and why isn't it money anymore? Well, it turns out that the Europeans came and they saw that they were using this as money. They figured out, okay, we know how to produce this in bulk. They went back to Europe, produced a ton of this stuff, traded it to all of these other people, just bought up everything, right? These things have another name. They're called slave beads. They're called slave beads because it was utilized during the slave trade. And this is the point about easy money, which is that when you have when you have somebody that's able to produce the money, they essentially control you. They can take your wealth away. And that's essentially what a lot of the European settlers to sub-Saharan Africa did. They took away the wealth of an entire subcontinent. The reason why they were able to do that is kind of a technical term, but it's called the Cantillon effect. And this is a term from economics. And basically what the Cantillon effect is that the first people that get to spend the newly created money capture most of the wealth. So if you're first or second or third person to spend the money before everyone realizes there's a much larger supply of it, well, you get the benefit of it as opposed to the suckers at the very end. And guess who it is that benefits from this? It's almost always the rich people, the people that are very close to that money. So either it's big government, bankers, a lot of big businesses, they get access to these loans that are essentially free. They're getting the first printed money. This is how they are able to sustain their wealth. Now, this wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that this causes some serious long-term uncertainty. Because when you can print money whenever you want, well, you can't really save, right? It causes uncertainty. You can't accumulate capital. And it makes it very difficult to plan ahead. And this, in turn, causes some pretty bad stuff. In particular, consumption and rent-seeking. Consumption and rent-seeking. And if you don't know what rent-seeking is this idea where you're basically taxing some transaction, and you're in the middle of some transaction without adding anything. So think about a typical bureaucrat. I know that Franz Kafka is Czech, right? Like I think he lived around here, and you know he wrote all of these novels about you know the craziness of bureaucracy. A large part of the craziness of bureaucracy is because it's a bunch of rent seekers, right? They're not adding anything of value. They are essentially taking money from everybody else. They're stealing from the wealth of everyone that's actually productive. And it also causes a lot of consumptive behavior, because when you don't have long-term certainty and you can't save for a long time, what are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to spend it before you have that chance. And it leads to insanity like this. Right? Like you get people that don't know how to make solar panels getting like $30 million from the government because they happen to have the right connections. And this is enormously wasteful. It's taking from everybody else, and you are spending it on people that aren't adding anything. It's not even like neutral behavior. It's like actually negative. It's actually negative. And this is the really sad thing about a fiat-based civilization. This is the question that people ask, right? Ask any college graduate, what's your biggest concern? How do I get a job? What do I do? And think about that question. Think about what that means, right? They're looking for their place in the world, quote unquote, right? They're looking for rent-seeking opportunities. They're looking for places where they can fit and do as little work as possible and get a salary. That is what a job in a typical fiat-based economy means. And this is what people have been asking for like the last 100 years under a fiat central banking system. And this causes some real social ills, like real social ills. Now, I love this cartoon because it's so typical of what the mentality of kind of like a millennial, typical millennial is supposed to be like, right? Like, and a sense of purpose, I guess, right? I would estimate that like something like 50% of the jobs out there are actually rent-seeking jobs, right? Between government bureaucracy and banking and like people in all sorts of jobs in corporate America, like ask any management consultant and they'll tell you, okay, at this big company, you could probably cut half of the people and nothing bad would happen. They're all rent seekers. In fact, it would probably improve because like, you know, you don't have to manage all of these crappy people. Now, if you are a rent seeker, think about what it's like to be a rent seeker, right? You know that you are not contributing anything. And you might have some rationalization in your mind, right? Like nobody actually thinks of themselves as rent seekers. But your soul knows. Deep down inside, you know, right? Right? Like think about what ails society today. We have epidemic levels of depression. Where do you think that comes from? There's a lot of people that don't have a sense of purpose because they know deep down that they are rent seekers, that they are taking and stealing from the rest of the economy, that aren't doing anything positive, and they're just leeches. And when you have that, well, what do? Right? You can get depressed and like be super unproductive, or you can try to drown that voice inside your head that's telling you that you are doing something completely worthless. And we have epidemic levels of that too, right? Whether it's alcohol or drugs or video games or sugar, right? Or, you know, TV or movies or sports or whatever. There's plenty of things to get addicted to, and that causes some serious consumption behavior because you're trying to drown that voice that's telling you you're not doing anything right. You're just a leech on society. And it's sad. It's sad. Now, what happens when you get enough people that are in that sort of state? Well, you get this. See, Rome didn't fall in a day. It took a while, but it was because there was monetary debasement. There were a lot of rent seekers towards the end. Diocletian famously kept debasing the denarii, right? It went from like 70% silver all the way down to like 5% silver, and even lower than that. And it got to the point where they had a society full of rent-seeking people, and then it falls. It falls, right? Like it's vulnerable to almost everything. It becomes a very fragile society because it's all top down. It's all top down. All right, so let's talk about money and how people make money and why fiat money is just so sinister and bad. Well, there's two ways to make money. The first is to make more of the monetary medium. So in the case of the trade beads or the slave beads that I showed you before, it was the European settlers that, that could gain money or the equivalent of money just by producing more of it, by going back and telling their glass blowers, hey, make us these beads and color them with paint, and we'll take them back to Africa and get a bunch of stuff for free. But they've made it much more efficient now. It's even easier. You don't even have to print it. You just like put it in a database. It's literally just like probably a script that they run or a button that they push. But that's one way to make money. It's to create more of that medium. Now, the second way is to provide goods and services, right? Like it could be a lemonade stand. It could be, driving an Uber car or something, right? Like you're doing something that benefits people. Now, the big thing about the former is that it does not add to society at all. And in fact, it's actually taking from society. You are when you print more of that monetary medium, you have a certain amount of wealth that's existent in civilization. And whatever you print, you're diluting everybody else's wealth. So in essence, you are stealing from everybody else. It's a form of taxation. And it's a very sinister form of taxation because so few people understand that it is stealing. And of course, they utilize this because they're not really earning it. They blow it like I don't know how many of you guys have been to a casino, but when you win a lot of money, there's a tendency for people to be extremely generous, right? And it's because they know they didn't really earn it. And that's kind of the mentality that a lot of these people have. The latter adds to society, right? When you have entrepreneurship, when you have innovation, you're actually adding to something. Because by definition, if somebody's willing to pay you, that means you're either doing something completely new, providing some sort of new good, or you're doing it better, faster, cheaper, more conveniently, something. You're doing something better. And you are adding to the wealth of civilization. You are growing the pie instead of finding your niche. You are growing the pie, right? And that's exactly what makes civilization grow. The thing is, when there's easy money, a lot of people go towards the former. They want to get into the money production business. And when there's hard money, well, they don't really have a choice. They go towards the latter. I mean, think about the last 40 years. Where have the best and the brightest people from the best colleges around the world, what have they been doing? Where do they go and find jobs? Investment banking, that's right, right? They go and try to get into the money production business. They're trying to rent seek off of money production. We could probably be on Mars by now if those people instead went and tried to create value for everybody. Instead, they've been rent seeking. They've been doing things that aren't really contributing. When there's hard money, though, like producing gold or something like that, or producing bitcoins, that's really hard. And it requires a very specialized skill set. And that means that most people aren't going to go into it unless you happen to have that particular skill set. Maybe you're very good at digging for gold, right? But if you don't have that skill set, you're going to go do something else because it's much more profitable for you. And that's what people end up doing in a hard money civilization. And when more people do that, that's how civilization gets built. That's what makes everything better. Now, I was born in Seoul, Korea, back in 1976, so you guys know how old I am. And even back then, it was very different. But I found this picture of what Seoul looked like back in 1900 and what it looks like now, right? This happened because people pursued entrepreneurship, because people pursued adding value to civilization. When you stop doing that, it starts to collapse. So there's a buildup during a hard money civilization, and there's a teardown during an easy money civilization. Right? And this is very indicative of that. All right, so let's talk about the revolution. Bitcoin is that revolution. Bitcoin is that revolution. And the reason why it's a revolution is because we get property rights. We get property rights. See, with Bitcoin, you are sovereign over your own coins. You are sovereign over your own money. But with fiat money, you're not. In a sense, you are not sovereign over your money. If you have money in your bank right now, your government can probably take it away. They can accuse you of terrorism, drugs, child porn, something. They can probably take it away. And if you were part of Cyprus, they just took it away regardless of what you did. So it's entirely possible that they could take it away at any time. Even if you have your money under a mattress, they can take it away. By inflating away your money, or doing what India did. They just said your bills are no good. It's entirely possible. But with Bitcoin, you have property rights over your own money. They're yours. They can't take it away. You could pay 17 pieces. You could do all sorts of things to keep your money. And now it takes a lot of effort to do that, but they can't take it away. They can't take it away. And this is what's so great about it. It gives us long-term certainty. Long-term certainty. A lot of people think that capitalism is all about materialism or something like that. That's nothing of the kind. Materialism happens when you have consumptive behavior that comes from easy money policies. Capitalism is about accumulating capital, okay? When you can save and you can plan for the long term, that's what people do. And that is why people go towards production and entrepreneurship. Production and entrepreneurship. See, capitalism is the process of long-term investment. You accumulate capital so you can make even more money. There's a really great illustration in Saif Dean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, about how in the beginning, people probably tried to catch fish with their hands. And they would catch maybe 1 or 2 fish a day doing it that way. It's very difficult to catch fish with your hands. And then some guy said, you know what, I'm gonna work a little harder, catch a few more fish, so I could take a day to go and make a fishing pole. That's capital accumulation. That's capitalism. Then, maybe that pole you can catch 4 fish a day instead of 2. Now you have efficiency. So, maybe he gathers enough capital to be able to take a week off and build a boat. Now he can go out further and catch even more fish on a per capita basis. And you could keep going like that to the point where we are today, where a fishing vessel takes like 5 years to build and like millions of dollars. But they go off the coast of Alaska, and a crew of like 8 people can catch like 100,000 fish in a week. Right? That's the level of efficiency. That's capitalism. That's capitalism. It isn't about like buying the sickest TV or something like that. That's not what capitalism is. It's about future investment. It's about production and entrepreneurship. And this is the nice thing about hard money, about long-term certainty, because you start asking a different question. Instead of asking, where are the rent-seeking opportunities? How do I get a job? You start asking this question: what do people want? What do people want? And what's nice about this, instead of a job is typically very restrictive, right? They want particular skills, and they have certain archetypes, right? We want an accountant. We want a lawyer. We want a programmer. It's not really about you per se. It's just you happen to have those particular skills. When you're asking this question, you're thinking about all of yourself. I'm speaking to you right now. I was a coder for 15 years, right? I never did public speaking as a coder. They never pay me to do that. But I get to do this in part because I know this is a pretty decent fit for what I do. And this is what hard money allows, is that when you start asking this question, it's tailored much more to who you are. Instead of like these soul-sucking jobs where it's not a very good fit oftentimes. It just happens to be what they want you to do. It's much more about what skills do I have where I can actually add value. And Bitcoin is what's going to take us there. Because this is what allows for certainty long term. When you have hard money, when you have possession of your own money, it allows all of these wonderful things. And this is because of ownership. And this is the mentality change that happens when you have ownership. Now, ownership can be kind of scary, right? Being your own bank means that you actually have to be your own bank. That's a lot of work, right? It requires a lot of responsibility. I don't know how many of you have moved your coins off of cold storage or something. Yeah. Were you sweating? Yeah, right. It's not easy. It requires some level of maturity, of responsibility in order to do, and that's a key part of having ownership of something. You have to, responsibility comes along with that ownership. So many people today aren't used to being responsible for anything. They like having the undo button at the cost of little freedom or something like that. But ownership is really good because that means you start taking care of your wealth, right? You start taking care of it, and you want it to grow. You start trying to figure out ways to make your assets better. And that often means that you provide goods and services to others. And that, in turn, gives you a long-term vision, right? It's like, what do I do long-term? Instead of thinking about tomorrow, you're thinking about 20, 30 years from now. And this gives everyone a much better perspective. And that leads to people actually building. And building for the long term, when you're actually contributing to society, oh man, is that satisfying. Instead of that small voice in your head that tells you you're not really doing anything productive for civilization, now you're excited to get up. Because you know you're doing something that people want, that you are adding value to civilization, that you are growing the pie. That's what's really exciting. Now, this is what I mean by having a higher view of human value. See, Bitcoin is this first step in that revolution, right? There are legal tender laws and all sorts of things to force us to utilize the currency in your country for all the saving and stuff like that. But once we step off, well, all of the other stuff is going to sort of tumble along with it. And this is why I say this is going to be a revolution. It's going to change everything. Because when you take away the financial power of the state, I mean, they don't really have much else. Everything runs on money. If you can't pay your soldiers, they're not going to go fight for you. And taking that wealth away, making it decentralized, that's the key. That's the key. Now, a lot of people ask me about this. Why are you wearing a cowboy hat? What's the story behind that? Well, so I have 3 reasons for that. First one is, obviously, I am from Texas. You can see the boots, got the belt, got the hat. That's the first reason. Second reason is because I am in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general, it's totally the Wild West, right? There's lots of opportunity, but also a lot of danger, and you could screw yourself up. And the third reason is because I love that 1800s era, in large part because the government kind of left you alone, right? If you think about it, America went from a backwater British colony to a world superpower in 100 years, largely on the backs of people that were entrepreneurs, right? They figured out how to make this canal across the Great Lakes, and conquered the West, right? They just said, okay, if you go there, then you can own some land. And people were like, all right, we'll go. And guess what? You promise them stuff, and they'll take care of it. They'll do a good job. And that's where I want to get to, right? That's the vision that I have for this world under Bitcoin. So when you have self-sovereignty, when you own your own things, when you have long-term vision, it changes everything. It changes everything. And this is how we're going to get there. This is the first step, is to take away the monetary power of the state. When we take that away, man, you remove oppression from so many forces, right? Because you take the monetary power away, they don't really have much else. They really don't. And here's the thing, self-sovereignty really builds civilization. It does. The last era where that really happened was from 1870 to about 1910. And that era was called the Gilded Age, La Belle Epoque. And this was when the entire world was on the gold standard. Okay? And that was a wonderful time. On a per capita basis, we had more innovation, we had more inventions, more entrepreneurship. You had all sorts of stuff happening that made the world better. And that was largely on the back of the fact that people controlled their own money. Since then, we've had all sorts of weird professions come up, right? Investment professionals, portfolio managers, foreign exchange traders, right? None of that existed back on the gold standard because you didn't have foreign exchange, you didn't have central banks, you didn't have investment professionals because your wealth would last. You didn't have to protect it by putting it into weird stores of value, which pretty much everyone does right now, right? If you have a 401k, you have to invest in 90 different things because who knows what might happen to any one of those companies. This is something that was built during the Gilded Age. Anyone want to guess where that's from? Yeah, all right, good. Somebody's obviously from there. Now, you might think, okay, wow, that's a beautiful building. And typically people think, okay, well, that's got to be some nice city in Europe or maybe even America or something like that. Not the case. This is Mexico City. See, prosperity lifts everything, right? It wasn't just the first world countries that got all of the prosperity. It trickled down to everything. Because when you have freedom, everybody wants to build. There's an opera house in Mexico City, right? And this was built during La Belle Epoque. This is what you get when you give people freedom. And this is ultimately what I want to talk about, is that I believe that social justice warriors or the people that are into that thing have a very low view of human value. They see people in Africa starving and they go, okay, well, we need to feed them, we need to house them, we need to clothe them. That's how they view the people, as liabilities that need to be taken care of. That's not my view. See, the real value of human beings is that we have the capacity to innovate, to create. And that is the tragedy of the civilization that we live in today. Because so many people are oppressed, they don't have the opportunity to express their creativity, their ingenuity, their inventiveness, their entrepreneurship. They don't have that opportunity, and that's the real tragedy. Think about all of the people that are poor and oppressed right now. If you unleash them in the world and allowed them to create their own businesses, figure out what other people want, instead of being anxious because they have a boot on their neck, how would the world change? How would the world change if you just got off their back? Instead, we have power-drunk people in all sorts of governments that just want to control everybody. That's the real tragedy. And this is why I am so opposed to like the SJWA. They just want their guy in charge. If only my guy were in charge, everything would be okay. They want a centralized solution to a decentralized problem. I want a decentralized solution to a decentralized problem. It isn't about passing laws. It isn't about diverting resources or remaking the pie and changing the allocation of things. It's about giving people the opportunity to create, to grow the pie, to make wealth. That's how civilization changes. That's how we become a better civilization. That's how we get ultimate social justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimmy, for your optimistic view. And I think there might be someone having some questions, so please raise your hand.
I think, oh, it's work. Cool. Thank you for a great speech. And I want to ask you about money printing. You talk about gold standards, and in gold standard we cannot print money. If you try to read book of De Soto in book Money, Bank Credit and Economic Cycle write about that in gold standard bank can print money because they get this money like deposits and took to other as credit, so it's credit expansion, and we can run credit expansion in Bitcoin too. So if you look to exchange right now, you can think about exchange like a bank, and so the question: is it hard money? Is it Bitcoin hard money? Because we don't know. We don't know about exchange. Is it have 100% of deposits or not?
Yeah. So you're talking about fractional reserve. And that certainly was a problem during the gold standard, because what banks would do is they would have, some amount X in deposits, and they would lend out 3X in loans. Now, the thing that was nice about that sort of thing was that only the people that deposited money in that bank were exposed. So if you know about the bank that you're with, then they can't lend out if they don't meet that reserve ratio or whatever. So the only people that were really exposed were the people that deposited. Thing about Bitcoin that's unique is that you can own your own keys. So you don't if somebody's fractional reserving, you don't really care. They can try it, and maybe it works for a while, but once they collapse, well, no one's going to shed a tear. No one's going to bail them out, right? That's the thing that was so dangerous about fiat money, is that they socialize the cost of failure. And this is what happened in 2008. Instead, it's localized to the people that took that risk. And instead of rewarding people that made dumb decisions, you punish them. And it's a market, in that sense, it's very, very much hard money, because you localize it to those people, and the suckers lose the money, and it flows towards people that are more careful about their money. And this happens all the time with like Ponzi schemes or whatever. The dumb people are the ones that get punished, and they learn. And it might be an expensive lesson, but this is how we all get wiser. And I think that's the right model, instead of socializing the cost because we feel sorry for them. That bothers me. All right. Yeah.
I have two questions. First is, in Czech Republic, around 10% of the workforce is working for state, and state is funded by taxes. Would you define taxes as rent-seeking?
Yeah, so I would say most government bureaucrats are definitely rent-seeking.
Okay.
In large part because they are not really adding value, right? Like, they make the regulations that you have to comply with, and it's like, if they didn't make that regulation in the first place, then you wouldn't need this bureaucrat in order to do it. It's like they can enforce. It's a form of a tax, right? Because that's essentially what's into.
Second question, how Bitcoin can change that? Because let's say that tomorrow everyone uses the Bitcoin, but there will be still laws which will tax us, right? So what we can do is, okay, we will not pay the taxes.
No, I mean, you can still pay taxes. Here's the thing about governments that's like the dirty secret of all government budgets. They're printing a ton of money. Like, every time there's a budget deficit, where does it come from? They print that money. They print that money. That shortfall doesn't come out of like thin air. Well, it does come out of thin air. They just print it. And that like, budgets are always like, it causes them to actually be more fiscally disciplined. And that means that they start cutting people because they're like, okay, well, you're not actually doing anything, or we can make this more optimal or whatever. And that naturally shrinks government. The last time like the U.S. had a balanced budget was like in like the late 90s, right? It's been a very long time. They've been printing money constantly. Every time they raise the debt ceiling or something, they're printing money constantly. I mean, this is how the state will shrink. And you know, people won't stand for real money being taxed. Like, people tolerate higher taxes in large part because through inflation, they're actually making a little bit more money each year. But when you have hard money, you know, the number just doesn't go up. And if they try to do it, this what leads to a revolution, or you get more influence. And you know, like, the state can't hand out candy anymore, right? Like that's essentially what they do to gain votes. When you have more producers, instead of rent seekers, you start shrinking government naturally.
So just to clarify, so what you are saying is that the Bitcoin will not solve this issue of rent seeking via taxing system, because half of the year I'm working for state basically. And
yeah, well, it'll shrink it. It'll just take a long time.
How it will shrink him only through the money printing, not through the lower taxation on, on mitigating the rent seeking, which you were.
Well, so first of all, like something like 40% of a typical government budget is just printed money. So you have to shrink the government by 40%. That's not a small amount. And when you shrink it by that much, and then like, you know, keep going, or you have to try to stay fiscally disciplined and all this stuff, or if you try to print your own money, then that might backfire and all this. Like it'll shrink it slowly, and then you know, the people with the purchasing power, the tax power, they're the ones that are going to have more influence in any sort of democratic society, and they'll vote people into office because they don't like getting taxed. Right? Or they don't like the quality of services or whatever. they're not getting good ROI on their money, it changes everything. It changes everything. And 40%, that's not bad, right? Like just to start off. And as you move towards like smaller and smaller government, especially with respect to war, by the way, because war budgets are enormous, and they're almost always from printed money. So when you start shrinking those budgets, it gets better. So it does solve the problem, at least partly. Will it solve it all the way? Not right away, but eventually it'll improve things, certainly.
Hi, Jimmy. Thank you. I think you've given really inspirational talk. I really like it. I agree with 95% what you said. I want to refer to that debate you had with Roger Ver, where you called Bitcoin Cash fiat money. I mean, a lot of what I've taken from your talk today was about innovation, entrepreneurship, and how we should encourage it in a free society. I really like that idea. I align with that. Isn't creating coins or just basically growing all these other projects than Bitcoin exactly what you want, where you enable everyone to do their own thing, and then obviously the best one will win? So I just wonder why you call it fiat money when I just see it, and I believe many other people, just as an attempt for innovation. Thank you.
So I think it's fiat money because they're attempting to print money. That's what they're doing. They're not actually adding anything. So I said before that there are two ways.
Sorry, I'll just jump into that. But Bitcoin printed money in the start as well.
What's that?
Well, when Bitcoin project started, we started printing money with mining as well. I mean, they're just trying to do the same thing. I understand that Bitcoin was first, but it's the same principle.
No, very much not. I said at the beginning that people get into there are two different ways to make money. You can either try to print your own money or get into the money production business, or you can add a good or service and provide that for people. The people that are doing ICOs, that are creating their altcoins or whatever, they are printing their own money. They're trying to do that very thing. That's what an ICO, that's what an altcoin, that's what they're doing. And the proof is in the pudding. They're making millions of dollars. Every single altcoin creator has made millions of dollars without adding value to anyone. Okay? That's what they've done. That's why it's not valuable. Now, are there some technically interesting things in those? Possibly. But they're centralized. It's not interesting. If it's centralized, you do hard forks or whatever, you're essentially telling everybody, we control the coin. If you don't upgrade your software, well, you don't have any money because you have to run the software we tell you. That's control. That's power over people. And they're not trying to innovate per se. They're trying to print their own money. They want to be the money producer. They want to be king of the hills. And I have no sympathy for that. The best thing that Satoshi did was disappear, because that actually decentralized Bitcoin. That actually decentralized Bitcoin. Before that, Satoshi had most of the say in all of the technical direction of Bitcoin. But when Satoshi disappeared, that decentralized it. And that's what makes it interesting. We already have centralized money. Right? It's called the US dollar or the euro or the yen, right? Those are all centralized digital money. And that's what these other projects like Bitcoin Cash or Ethereum or whatever ICO, they are all just printed, they're just printing money. It doesn't add anything to anyone. And that's the tragedy of the ICO space right now. What if all of those people were providing goods and services? How much better would things be? Instead of all these shit coins, we'd have real products. We'd have innovation. We'd have entrepreneurship. Instead, everyone's trying to print their own money. And I can't wait until all of those things die in a giant dumpster fire. I can't hear you. Yeah. Yeah.
Questions?
So, thank you for the talk. I also enjoyed your discussions on the cruise with Roger. Well, my previous the previous one was agreeing with your talk, most of it. I kind of have the opposite direction. Regarding especially the rent seeking, I was kind of working for a long time, so basically you're sort of offended me by calling me a rent seeker. And actually the people working and not the capitalist being the rent seeker is kind of a weird kind of view on it. Nevertheless, my question goes in another direction. What is productivity, entrepreneurship, or not rent seeking in hodling?
In hodling, I mean that's just capital accumulation. So that's the capitalism part of money. But I mean, back to your thing about rent seeking, I'll fully admit, when I was a coder, there were definitely parts of my job that were rent seeking. I didn't want to get fired, and a lot of coders do this. They make sure that they know something that no one else knows so they can keep their job, right? Because you're taxing any changes to a particular part of your code base. And this is kind of the natural human instinct. You want to keep your job. You want a steady thing. I mean, I don't mean to be morally judgmental per se. I'm just telling you what it is, right? Like you are taxing transactions and not really adding value oftentimes. And that, I mean, like, it's not all rent seeking all the time, but there's probably, many of you that have worked in large corporations, there's at least like 50% of your day probably spent in useless meetings that don't add anything to anyone, right? Like that, and that should tell you, okay, if you were actually being productive and doing something worthwhile, you wouldn't spend time doing crap that doesn't do or accomplish anything. So, I mean, that should be prima facie evidence of rent-seeking behavior that's sort of completely embedded in our society today because of fiat money.
Thank you very much. You opened a big topic. It requires a lot of discussion, but we have to cut it because we ran out of time. But thank you very much, Jimmy Song. And we continue in 8 minutes.